Hi, I'm Stuart Malina, Music Director of the Harrisburg Symphony Orchestra. Welcome to our December installment of Conversations with the Maestro. Today we meet our principal timpanist, Peter Wilson, who will demonstrate, chat with us about his background, and probably show you something you don't know about this very interesting instrument. And so with no further ado, welcome Peter.
Welcome. It's great to see you, Peter.
Thanks, Stuart. It's great to see you again. It's been a little over a month, I guess, since we last saw each other.
You were here for the Beethoven Seventh. How was it coming back and playing with the orchestra again?
It was wonderful. I was, feeling kind of settled into my non-playing routine, feeling like, okay, I can get through this. But then, to get back and play, you realize just how much you've missed the experience, the feeling of playing live with others. And also, especially the colleagues in Harrisburg who, are some of my favorite colleagues that I've ever had.
Yeah, here. I think that's one of the things that a lot of people would say about our orchestra is the friendships are really what makes the music making so joyful.
Yes. Yeah.
So where are you? Where are you broadcasting from today?
I'm from in my living room in Phoenix. I moved here 8 years ago. After getting married, we were actually living long distance for 8 months after we got married. My wife is the principal flutist of the Phoenix Symphony. And we met doing my other favorite job in Colorado. In the summertime, I played with Colorado Music Festival.
Wonderful.
And so she was a guest principal that summer. And we thought, long distance, this is foolishness. And it turned out not to be foolish at all. So now I live in Phoenix, but I still play in Harrisburg because I can't give it up.
Well, I actually think that you are probably the person who travels the farthest to play with us. Although every so often we do have one player who comes from China. So I
heard about this. That blew my mind when I heard that. Like it seems like a lot.
Plenty far.
Yeah.
But, I very much appreciate that you make the trip. It's great having you always.
Thank you.
So what we'll start with today is what I generally will start with, and that's where did you come from? Where did you grow up? And why drums? Why? What drew you to the drums and to the timpani?
Well, born in Philadelphia and raised in the suburbs. I was raised in a town called Lansdowne, very, very small. It's 1 square mile southwest of Philadelphia, close to bigger places like Upper Darby and Chester.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's see, it was expected. My mom had piano lessons growing up. It was expected that all 3 children, my 2 siblings and I, would take lessons. And I was the youngest, so I was the last to choose my instrument. My sister played piano, my brother played trumpet. My dad was not musical, but had wished to be a trumpet player as a boy, but his father decided that the trumpet was too loud. And lo and behold, his son was a drummer, which seems very unfair. But I remember, I actually told this story quite recently because it came up and I'd sort of forgotten. The way that I chose the drums was, as a little kid, I was very frustrated with my lack of dexterity. I would see, adults moving their hands very rapidly on either playing the piano or typing or just all these super dexterous things. And I thought, I wish my hands could move fast. And then I saw someone playing a drum roll and I thought, that's the fastest thing of all. If I could learn to do that, then I would achieve something.
Wow. How old were you at this point?
Well, I actually started asking for drum lessons at age 4. And my parents thought, well, not just yet. Maybe in a couple of years, and maybe he'll pick something else. And so by the age of 6, I was still on the drums. They were supportive. They gave me a toy drum set, which I had tons and tons of fun with. And at age 6, I started lessons. And Philadelphia is a terrific place to grow up if you're a percussionist. There's a very, very rich tradition and lots of great teachers, lots of graduates from the great institutions of educational institutions like Temple and Curtis,
sure,
former University of the Arts.
Legendary teachers.
Yeah. So I really had access to the best instruction from quite an early age. Although I wasn't serious really until youth orchestra. My teacher at the time said, you're not playing with your school orchestra. My school orchestra it wasn't any fun. So I didn't do that. But she said, you should play in an ensemble. So she was friends with the conductor of the Philadelphia Youth Orchestra. She said, go audition for him. And so I did and was instantly terrified of the man. he was a very old school maestro. And he liked to intimidate people. That was part of his educational shtick. And by my second year, I had sort of overcome his judgment. He found me lacking in numerous ways, and he was 100% right. I was very, very sure of myself, and not for good reason.
Well, and we knew each other back in those days.
That is right. Yes.
For 2 years, I was the assistant conductor of the Philadelphia Youth Orchestra when you were playing. And I remember Joe Primavera. I mean, I loved him. He was, and I think everyone loved him. But yes, he was a tough taskmaster.
Yes.
And
nearly made me cry.
Back.
Nearly cried twice.
I remember, in fact, him saying, it might have been to you or to one of the other drummers, like, why don't you learn a musical instrument?
Yes. My favorite moment, and actually, honestly, one of the best moments, before I was like in his good books, we were playing Capriccio Espagnol, and I was playing the triangle part, totally green. My first time ever playing real orchestral music. And so he was on my case for dynamics. I didn't have a lot of control. Playing softly was not something I did easily. And so I worked very, very hard on that soft triangle roll during the
it's a really tough part.
harp cadenza. And I got so much control that he stopped in the harp cadenza and said, "That's very nice, son, but it ain't worth a damn if I can't hear it." And I think that is something we should always remember as musicians. It has to be audible.
Exactly.
Whatever we do, it has to translate to the audience.
But what a phenomenal program the Philadelphia Youth Orchestra was and still is.
Yes. And that's where I felt for the first time, just like with Harrisburg and with Colorado, these are my people. Like these, I was, a weird kid at school. I was into, classical music. And so who do I hang out with at school? There was nobody. I went to a very small Quaker school. Yeah. When I got to youth orchestra, these people were weird the same way that I was.
And so did you only play classical music at the time? Were you a drummer who also wanted to play rock and roll drum?
Yeah, I really loved drum set playing, and I did it a lot through middle school, high school. Mm-hmm. And then once I got to college, I realized that like I had not been working nearly hard enough on drum set to be competitive the way I had been in classical. Yeah. Like when you want to be a successful drum set player starting in the 90s, which is when I started college, you had to be very, very advanced, far, far beyond where I was. And I thought, those people who have dedicated themselves to that, that's who should be doing that, because I'm not fully qualified. Like people like Chris Rose, who maintain that very seriously their entire careers, they're the exception in the classical world, which makes someone like Chris such a valuable addition to the orchestra.
You're
like
here.
A classical guy who can really swing is a precious commodity.
That is true. That's very interesting. So were you one of these people who had a drum set in his room and played along with albums?
Yeah. Yes. Although I was really, I didn't have a Walkman most of those years, so it was much too loud for me to hear the radio. Mm-hmm. Although I did find a recording, like a cassette recording I made of myself when I was probably 10, playing along with Endless Love on the radio, the Diana Ross and Lionel Richie song. And by that time, I thought I had everything down because my teacher was very tolerant and not challenging me maybe in certain ways. Mm-hmm. And man, when I heard myself playing along with the radio then, I thought, ooh, my rhythm is terrible. Thank goodness I got into an ensemble where there's this external reference that you have, an external standard that you have to meet.
Isn't that cool? Wow. So, okay. So you've gotten through high school, you've played in the youth orchestra. What then? Where did you end up deciding to study music for college?
I thought about a lot of places, but at the time, the University of Michigan was really coming on strong, putting out some very, very exciting students. And so my teacher at the time, who is a freelancer in Philadelphia now, is principal percussion of Pittsburgh Symphony. Uh-huh. He said, I think it's not a mistake for you to go to music school, which I know he'd recently said to other students. Mm-hmm. So that was very encouraging. He said, Michigan's number one. And so I really wanted to go to someplace that was a little more famous, but I ended up choosing Michigan. And I got a lot of great... Sorry?
You say that, but at this point, I think like Michigan is, it really is as famous and high quality as anywhere.
Yeah, I wanted to tell my schoolmates though that I was going to Juilliard or Curtis, and I had to let that go. And and Michigan was a great experience, and I learned a lot of different things. One of the best parts about Michigan was actually the free improvisation program there. There's jazz, which is quite structured. There's free improvisation, which can be any degree of structured, and frequently has zero structure predetermined. And they had this wonderful teacher, Ed Sareth, who was the jazz professor. And he really encouraged the classical musicians to go and join that group, even if we didn't have any jazz background. And it was tremendous. That's the only time I felt like a composer, was when I was improvising. And, a lot of the music probably was not of interest to an audience, but for us as music students, it was incredibly, it was a profound experience. That was one of the best things.
There's a very profound, long, and somewhat lost tradition of classical musicians learning how to improvise. I mean, in the 19th century, any classical musician worth his salt would be able to sit down and improvise. And I think it's wonderful that Michigan encourages that.
Yes. There was a bit of conflict between the classical and the hippie free sectors of the school. But I was very, very glad to be there. And I worked with some tremendous musicians who could do the whole range of improvisation, tonal improvisation, which I never mastered. I was mostly into the rhythmical and like tone clusters and just making these sort of expressive gestures on the mallet instruments without really having a tonal structure to it.
Sure.
But
so when was it that you made the shift from playing pure percussion to playing timpani, or was it all part and parcel?
I thought about it once I was done with grad school. For grad school, I went to Temple University and studied with really the one who sort of helped make Philadelphia what it is. I mean, he had predecessors who were very, very important as well. But Alan Abel was my teacher at Temple, and he taught both timpani and percussion equally, which many schools do not do. Like the Cleveland Institute famously has a timpani major and a percussion major. And by this time I'd met some students from Cleveland, and I thought, oh, I guess at some point I do have to choose, don't I? And I thought back on like which concerts I felt the most engaged, the most integrated into the orchestra. And it was always when I was playing a good timpani part. Playing percussion is a wonderful challenge, and I still love to play percussion. But I feel more like when I'm playing the percussion, I'm the seasoning being sprinkled on the music, rather than when I play timpani, I feel like I'm the bones of the music.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very satisfying feeling for me.
Well, that's really cool. Well, why don't we take this moment, since you're talking about the timpani, to take a little bit of a break from the biography and talk a little bit about the timpani itself and what makes a timpani a timpani.
Okay.
Or a tympanum, a tympanum.
Tympano, I think is the...
Tympano.
Yeah, tympanum is also correct. That's the Latin way to say it. This is one of the issues with our instrument. The spelling and grammar are not standardized.
We'll stick with the pedestrian atympany and set of timpani.
So they started out like many orchestral percussion instruments in Turkey. And they were a military instrument, like many of the percussion instruments. And they were mounted on horses. They were very small compared to today's size. Like this is like one of the smaller diameters of a timpani drum today. And the ones on horses were about like this, much smaller, and not really as resonant. I mean, much less resonant than the modern instrument. It's the Baroque timpani that were used during Bach's time and really up through Beethoven's time. Those are very similar. There's no pedal. They just sit on like a quadruped, and you tune them with these hand screws, and you try to get the tension even all the way around. And it was in the 1800s, like that things started to develop. They started to put them in a frame, so they were standing on the floor, and you could sit in a stool and play them comfortably. And then right around Wagner's time, I think, is when they started to add pedals, so that the drums could be tuned instantaneously with a foot, rather than having to stop and use both hands to tune.
Well, let's talk just for a moment, just for those of the people watching this who know nothing at all. The timpani actually is pitched, that it actually plays a note, unlike a bass drum. Bass drum is just a thud.
Right.
and a timpani plays a note. So
right, a notated pitch, just like a bass fiddle would or a flute would. So we play in the bass clef, and it's a non-transposing instrument. If, let's say, we were playing Beethoven 7, normally with orchestra, that would be in the key of A. So usually typically play the tonic and the fifth of the key. So that could be either a fifth up or a fourth down, for those who are into theory. And then, of course, along came Beethoven, who in his 8th symphony for the first time used octave Fs. Yeah, and that really rocked people's worlds when he did that, because really the polite thing to do was to write for the timpani in a perfect fourth or a perfect fifth and just leave it at that. If I could backtrack 1 second.
Sure.
The Baroque timpanists were expected to improvise. For instance, at the end of the Hallelujah chorus, there's a very long roll that's notated at the very end of the Hallelujah chorus, but that's actually an invitation to improvise. Like when you play with a Baroque orchestra, and often with a modern orchestra, they'll say, make something up.
Yeah.
And that is really one of the great joys. And it's much less intimidating to try to improvise on timpani than it is to be like jazz piano improvising with all those chords. Like to improvise on timpani is a fairly easy thing, especially if you're a drum set player, because drum set players improvise.
That's actually pretty cool. So it's just a standard convention for those long cadential notes.
Yes. Yeah. The Baroque period, the timpani were encouraged, and like the harpsichordists who would ornament. I played with a wonderful harpsichordist named Ken Cooper.
Oh, I know Ken.
And he never did the same performance twice. And I would sometimes laugh out loud while playing along with him, just because of the wit and the surprise that he brought to his parts. It was just the surprise of improvisations is one of the greatest things they bring to a musical moment.
That's very cool. Awesome. And so moving forward in history, you have 2 timpani generally in Beethoven's music. When do we start adding other timpani? Because these days you might have an array of 6 or even more.
Yes.
Of various sizes.
To my knowledge, I've heard rumors. I don't know the piece in question. There's a rumor that there is a piece by Handel that has a third timpani.
That's what I
but I haven't seen it. Like he wrote for lower notes than were reachable by the timpani of the time. So people had to make their instruments to fit accordingly. And then for sure, starting with Brahms, although Brahms is after Wagner. The first person to go beyond 2 drums, it's hard to answer.
I'll have to look that up. It's just an interesting idea, but sometime in the middle of the 19th century, it became.
Yeah, I thought I knew that, and it turns out I don't.
So you've recorded some timpani excerpts for us. Do you want to tell us about the first of those? Yes.
Well, I started with the Beethoven 9 excerpt because that is one of the most iconic moments for the timpani. I remember the first time I saw it. It's just so startling. That scherzo movement, yum-ba-dum, bum-ba-dum, bum-ba-dum. It's a Me Too moment for the timpani, which we don't usually get. Beethoven really was the first person to unlock the maximum potential of the timpani in the 2-drum configuration.
Yeah.
He's like, I've heard him described as the Bach of timpani, and then Bartók is like the Paganini of the timpani.
Oh, that makes sense.
There's like an early master and a modern master.
Yeah, and Bartók turns it into the multi-drum virtuoso display that it is.
Yes, and like I think Beethoven did things that timpanists themselves would not have conceived of without him. He wrote for us in a way that showed an understanding of the instrument, an instrument that he never played to my knowledge. And it's just such a wonderful testament to his creativity that he saw into our instrument untapped potential and really released us from sort of these, I hate to say it, but rather tepid parts that Mozart was writing for us.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Well, let's hear it. This is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony Scherzo. Okay, so what else do you have? What's the next excerpt that you'd like to play for us?
My second excerpt is Mahler's Seventh Symphony.
Oh, nice.
And this is another one where the timpani are given something to do, which is very unusual. The Seventh Symphony, the last movement is a rondo, and the melody of the rondo is introduced by the timpani. We're the first instrument to play solo in that last movement. And boy, the first time I did that, the only time I've done that, waiting for that fourth movement to end so I could start the fifth movement, I've just never experienced anticipation like that. It's one of the most glorious moments. And I've actually chosen that rondo theme comes back multiple times throughout the movement. I've chosen, I think, the third time that it comes back when it's in A major. And it's a little bit more of an entertaining version of the theme to play solo.
Fantastic. Let's give it a hear. So it sounds to me, listening to that Mahler, that things not only are getting more interesting in terms of melodic content, but also it must be getting more difficult to play well.
Yes, that Mahler seventh part. I remember having tried to play through it before, and I have my tunings all worked out. There are numerous spots throughout that piece, but especially in the first and fifth movements where I thought, I don't know how I'm going to make all these tuning changes. I just didn't know if physically I could do it quickly enough, or if mentally I could have my routine honed enough. This is one thing that comes up as the timpani become more and more flexible in their pitch. The demands of our ears and our feet to keep changing the pitch of up to 4 or even more drums. In the case of Mahler, it's only 4. But even just keeping track of those 4 drums took me months to get through with confidence.
So is it a choreography issue, or is it an
exactly issue? Yes. It's like finding the order in which to do things so that you're ready when it's time to play again. So during the rest, we're very, very busy, which is unusual, I think, for instruments. Usually instruments, when they rest, they rest. And often with the timpani, it's a time to do some housekeeping and get into a new key.
Just timpani and harp, as far as I can think, that have to make those in the moment adjustments to change the notes.
Yes. And sometimes in Mahler and other things, you don't even have a chance to stop playing. You move your feet while you're playing, and you hope you move them the right amount. One of the wonderful things that was developed on the timpani is the tuning gauge, which is a little controversial among timpanists because it is sort of a shortcut to playing in tune oftentimes.
Yeah.
If you set up this tuning gauge, it's a mechanical pointer that moves along with the pedal, and it points to notes on this sliding scale. And so if you learn how to use those, you can be pretty much in tune without ever putting your ear down to tap. Yeah. But even so, even using the tuning gauges, you can still get into very deep water. And Mahler 7 is very much a case of that. Bartok does that to us routinely. Aaron Copland, that third symphony, which we did a few years ago.
Yeah.
Good gracious, that is just about as hard as it gets. There's another one where I played it in undergraduate and I thought, I hope I'm capable of playing this part.
Yeah.
There's still those moments where.
Well, and people really need to understand that the slightest discrepancy in pitch can spoil the entire sound of the whole orchestra.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is a very dominant sound, and it is the bass, and orchestras tune from the bass up.
Yep. And
if the bass is wrong, then I've done a lot of damage.
It's an awful lot of power to invest in a percussionist.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It is. Fortunately, we've grown into it, but I wonder, back in the olden days, when so many timpanists were, violists who got dystonia, or, clarinetists who got tendinitis, and then they'd slide over. Even in my lifetime, the Philadelphia Orchestra, their first call percussion sub was a member of the viola section.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, it's a recent thing that we don't just say any instrumentalist can play percussion. It's only recently.
Well, and now they're among the most competitive auditions that any.
Oh my goodness! I it's hard to think of, other than concertmaster auditions, another thing where, because the schooling is so geared towards the audition preparation now, more than any other instrument I know. And so people go into auditions, I mean, prepared isn't even the word for it. They're so prepared. It's it's like what elite athletes do. It is
dazzling to listen to a high level percussion audition. It blows you away.
Yes, and we've had some superstars come and take auditions for the Harrisburg Symphony. I remember when I won my job, there was a future member of the Philadelphia Orchestra, Houston Symphony, and Chicago Symphony at that audition.
I remember that audition.
Somehow I won, which seems insane. And
it was your day.
and then subsequent auditions. Now the principal percussionist of Cleveland Orchestra won one of our spots, and man, it's just we get a very, very high level, even for a part-time job like Harrisburg. It's just you've got to compete with the best every level of the industry, and people really know these excerpts.
Okay, so now about modern timpani. This is my set of modern drums, the usual sizes. So biggest on the left, smallest on the right, unless you're German or from Cleveland, in which case you do it the opposite way. Biggest drum on the right, smallest drum on the left. You're seeing that more and more. The timpanist of New York Philharmonic is a guy from Germany. He plays German style. And, okay, so timpani used to be tuned only by those T-handles going around individually and tightening down the head or loosening it with those screws. You can see on the modern drum, those things have been made much lower profile, and those are only used for fine tuning now to make sure the head is pulling down evenly on all sides. If you're not fine tuning, you can do a little bit of pitch adjustment with this. It's called the master screw. Master screw can make smaller adjustments in pitch. Now the pedal, that's where the real money is. That's where the real action is. The pedal can change with just a small motion. And so these are the tuning gauges, the controversial tuning gauges, which I think are great, and I use them a lot. Demo of how the pedals work. You see they're connected to this arm here, which goes to a cam. That cam moves that bottom arm, which pulls down on all of these tension rods, and that's how you get a change in tension on the head. And changing the tension of the head changes the pitch.
So let's go to the next one. What pedals do you have?
Next one is a real personal favorite of mine. I've never played it live. It doesn't come up very much. It's Frank Martin's Concerto for 7 wind instruments and timpani. And it has a very soloistic way of writing for the timpani, particularly in the finale. And this, again, is one of the more melodic things. But I love it in a way that I love the Beethoven and the Mahler. It is melodic, but it's also still really drummy. Sometimes we think of drummy as being the opposite of melodic. And one of the fun things as a percussionist and a timpanist is trying to find these sort of spiky sounding instruments and finding a lyrical voice within them. And the Martin for me really highlights both. There's a lot of like aggressive accenting and all that, but there's also this long lines that he writes for us that really let us stretch ourselves in a phrasing way, which even Mahler really didn't get to. And it uses all 4 drums very evenly, and it's just a joy to play.
Let's hear it. Wow, that was also really cool. I actually think it's a really cool piece.
It is such a cool piece.
It could potentially be a COVID kind of piece because it's small orchestration and a dazzling ensemble piece.
Yeah, just what I was thinking. And it would be exciting, I think, for audiences to get to hear something like that, which maybe they've never heard before.
Oh, I would say certainly.
And maybe they've never heard Frank Martin's music at all.
Yeah.
I remember I was pretty well into my career before I heard of him.
Yeah, and me too.
Yeah.
And he writes such a delightful mix of traditional classical, modernistic, and jazzy music kind of meshed into one.
He has that sort of dry modernist sarcasm, but it's also really charming and has a twinkle in its eye. This Hindemith in his Symphonic Metamorphosis, which I've played with the Harrisburg Symphony twice now.
My wife's favorite piece. I have no choice.
Oh my gosh, it is such, and I played that one in a youth orchestra, perhaps when you were.
I don't remember. Maybe.
And man, that timpani solo is one of the most creative uses of the drums, because that movement is about two melodies that use more or less the same set of pitches, or like relative same set of pitches. And it starts off with the dum da da dum dum da 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 dum, and then if you mix those notes around, you can have da da dum 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 da dum, which the brass is introduced in their sort of section solo in the second movement, and then the timpani comes in a very brash, rude way to sort of try to take ownership of things, I guess, which only lasts so long because timpanists shouldn't be in the spotlight for too long. That's one of the things I love about the instrument. You get the spotlight for 5 seconds, then you go away again.
Well, let's hear it. It's one of my favorite moments and one of my favorite pieces.
Awesome.
Okay, so the last of your excerpts is by the composer you described as the Paganini of timpani. Talk a little bit about this excerpt.
So Bartók, he took pedaled timpani and did things with them that I would say only Richard Strauss wrote some comparable things in the same era. Strauss, of course, working in a much more tonal way, writing sort of walking bass lines for the timpani that are usually not that chromatic, but they move around in a diatonic way. Bartók wrote things, again, at the limit of even modern players' ability. Like, to play some of those Bartók pieces are right at the limit of playability. Mm-hmm. He just, again, like Beethoven, he saw potential in the instrument, an instrument he himself did not play, and knew just how far he could push things. In a similar way, Bernstein's parts are just this side of unplayable. And I always find that amazing that people have this instinct for what is virtuosic and what is just stupid. Mm-hmm. Like, and they never cross that line into like, I'm not going to play this. Nobody could play this. They always stop short of that point so that you really have to grow into those parts. And so this particular Bartók is the first one that I was introduced to show just how flexible the timpani can be. There's a very complex chord progression in the middle of the scherzo movement of the Concerto for Orchestra. And along with the harp, we're playing these beautiful flowing chords and shifting keys once or twice a measure, which for the timpani is no picnic. So you have to really plan out, like, the first thing I do when I get a timpani part for Harrisburg Symphony, when I get it, in the mail or get a PDF, I sit down in front of the TV and I'm like, okay, which note goes where? And sometimes that takes an hour or two. Sure. And with Bartók, it's especially true. Which note goes where? Which drum? Because each drum has a different range. Not every drum can get every note. So you have to figure out ways to get the notes you need on the drums you have.
Yep.
And Bartók just knew what to do.
So what I find incredibly challenging in my mind, if I were a timpanist about that, is that not only do you have this constant shifting of tonality, I mean, and that alone must drive you crazy. You have to really know the piece on a level well beyond just the timpani line, but also it has to sound seamless. It doesn't, it's not like you're playing loud and aggressive so you can hide behind that.
Right.
It has
That's
to
a very
be
good point.
lyrical. It has to guide the harmony. And you know, I've heard many a timpanist bemoan that particular passage.
Yes. Yeah. To do something that technically difficult while playing with great restraint is one of the hardest things. The high-powered instruments, I think, with like the trumpet, the trombone, the horn, when you have to do something that is so technical while holding yourself back so as not to overwhelm the balance, that takes maturity. I mean, a kid could maybe do it, but it's a whole lot easier being an experienced professional.
Well, and also if you get it right, no one notices.
That is very true.
It happens. But you know, you do the end of Beethoven 8 and everyone knows exactly what you're doing because you are the center of attention.
Yeah.
And it sounds really cool. It sounds like it's difficult. Maybe it is, or maybe it isn't. But this, you know, if you don't get it right, it destroys a magical moment. And if you do get it right, it just is the way it should be.
Yes, I have very good friends who I play like physically close to them in orchestra. And I say, you know, what did you think of so-and-so's playing on timpani? And they said, I don't know. I never noticed timpani unless it's bad.
Yeah, it's like, oh, thanks. Yeah, thanks.
It's a little heartbreaking, but we have to, you know, that's the way it is. If even like fellow musicians find that it sort of blends in with the woodwork, then of course we don't expect more from the audience. Like it might escape your notice, but just know that we are quietly working on something back there, trying to have as much finesse as possible.
So before we leave this subject of the musical end of timpani playing, you know, you've played a lot of these soloistic kinds of things. Is there a composer whose music you particularly love playing that may not be that kind of like dramatic 3 or 4 second moment? Ooh. Someone who really gets what the timpani is all about?
Probably Brahms. Brahms's timpani parts are very much blendy, but they're so satisfying. There's, I had like this inspiration a while back playing some Brahms where I just felt like I was in a room with the kindest grandfather telling me the most important things about life in the most gracious and heartwarming way. And when I play Brahms, that's always the feeling that I get. And you wouldn't necessarily, he writes a little bit soloistically for the timpani, but generally it's blended ensemble stuff. And you just feel like $1 million when you're playing it, because again, he shows that he understands our art, even being an outsider to it, and gives us some of the most wonderful things to do. And I'm so grateful for him.
I would agree with you there. So let's return a little bit now to your life, to your biography.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about your audition to get into the Harrisburg Symphony Orchestra. What brought you to Harrisburg in the first place? I mean, was it just seeing an ad and being like, oh, Harrisburg, or did you know anything about the orchestra having grown up in the Philly area?
I was freelancing at the time, and so Harrisburg had a good reputation even in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And so they needed some subs. And actually a friend of mine was the first to get called. His name's Ted Atkatz, and he would later be principal percussion of Chicago Symphony. And he said, Peter, you know, they need subs. You should really like send them a resume. And so I played a couple times as a sub in the orchestra, and the audition happened. And of course I was going to take that. I took every audition, let alone the good ones. And Harrisburg was one of the good ones. And so luckily there were 2 spots that day. Chris Rose got the top spot and I got the second spot. And I'm so grateful that there were 2 spots, because if there weren't, I wouldn't have been a member.
And that was, those were percussion spots, not timpani.
Yes, correct. I entered as second percussion and played 1 season, then promptly the timpanist left and joined the New Zealand Symphony. Mm-hmm. And so I shared the timpani job with a DC area freelancer who's now timpanist of the Milwaukee Symphony, a guy named Dean Borgasani.
Wow.
We split the job. He got Milwaukee. So then it became just me for a season or 2. Then there was an audition and I very, very luckily won. And that's really where I always wanted to be. I loved being in the percussion section. being in a section with a great principal like Chris Rose is really a pleasure. And I miss sort of having him as a boss. Now we're sort of, equal colleagues, which is actually even better. But I love being the timpanist of the Harrisburg Symphony because, one of the things we can do, we call it driving the bus. Like the timpani can be a leading instrument, even though it's low, it's in the back. If the orchestra trusts you, you can help sort of lead the orchestra in the ways that it needs to go. And I feel like the Harrisburg Symphony trusts me to do that. And I feel very empowered to stretch my wings creatively in the Harrisburg Symphony because of that trust. Our colleagues are really good at their jobs, and we appreciate each other and give each other space.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. And again, it's something that a lot of people talk about, but there is a nice sense of that, and well earned on your part as well. I
Thanks.
certainly count on you a lot of the time. And just looking back a month when we were doing that different orchestration of Beethoven 7, I mean, the timpani has to drive the bus a lot of the time, or the thing will die.
Right. Yeah, this was an insight I had years ago when I was looking back on my favorite timpanists in history, like of the 20th century. Without exception, they all played drum set in dance because there were so many, jazz bands and dance halls around the country in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And I just thought, I don't think this is a coincidence. I think what a drum set player does and what a timpanist does should be almost the same thing. And it's not always the right moment in classical music for the timpani to lead. So hopefully we have good judgment about that. Yep. But when it is time to lead, you really want to be like a drum set player. So Chris Rose and I have that in common as well.
Yeah, that's actually a really good insight. That makes a lot of sense. So what we thought we would do now is talk a little bit about the sticks that you use.
Oh yeah.
Do you call them sticks? Do you call them mallets? Do you call them? Okay.
Yeah. There's really, again, it's not standardized. Sticks, for timpani sticks started out one way. The Baroque timpani and the military timpani sticks were wood, just a turned piece of wood with a sort of knobby ending on it. And over time, people started to change those sticks, putting felt on them to get a more round tonal sound. This would have been after Beethoven's time. So Beethoven never saw a felt-coated timpani stick. They would also cut out discs of flannel and stack them up like pancakes. And those are flannel sticks. So every timpani stick has a core of some kind that's on a shaft. The shaft can be wood. Bamboo is my go-to. I have some wood sticks, but mostly bamboo. People are starting to use carbon fiber now. And there have also been sticks made with poly resin. So there's all sorts of materials people can use, but I like bamboo with the skin off.
And you make it yourself?
I did. I learned to make sticks at a young age. In Philly, that was a big thing to teach your students. And then I went to the Eastern Music Festival in North Carolina. One of the great educational experiences of my life. I spent 2 summers there and learned more in 6 weeks than I could in 6 months back home. And there was a wonderful timpanist of that orchestra, John Feddersen of the
I know him
North Carolina
Symphony.
I mean, kind of a genius. And he made all his own sticks. I don't think he bought a single one. And there's a lot of reasons for doing that. It's one, to develop your musicianship as a timpanist, to sort of know your tools of the trade. And my number one hero of the timpani, Cloyd Duff of the Cleveland Orchestra, said every timpanist should make his own sticks. And he did. And I mean, he really revolutionized our instrument. And it's much harder to do now that things are so much more advanced and developed. But I definitely became the player I am because I could make exactly the stick that I wanted. I could have a stick that was perfectly made, but I just think, oh, I wish this was a little lighter. I wish this was a little heavier. And as a timpanist, you can't just buy every stick you want. There are limits, there are financial limits. And also the stick maker's patience runs out. I've talked to a number of stick makers and they just say customers are nothing but a headache. And having been my own customer, I get it, because these tiny little nuances, it's like a violin bow. It's certainly not at the same level of refinement as a violin bow, but it's in that direction. Like if the weight's not quite the way you want it, if the feel's not quite the way you want, the vibration in your hand, all these things matter when you're playing extended passages of music. And so to make things come off the way I wanted them to, I needed the right sticks. There's a lot you can do with your hands to refine things, but it makes it so much easier if you have just the right stick.
Well, could we take a moment and could you get some of these sticks and show us what they look like?
Yes. So these are my Baroque sticks. They're very, very small. They're about 3 or 4 inches longer than a normal modern stick. You can see it's a turned piece of wood. These are a replica of actual Baroque mallets that I bought from a man named Ben Harms, who is one of the leading historians of timpani in the US. He knows a lot. And this is, let's see, remember I was talking about those flannel sticks where it's like stacked up discs. I don't know if you can see that, but this is
Yeah, that is cool.
This looks like a solid piece of material, but it's actually just disc upon disc upon disc of flannel stuck onto a spindle, and then you tighten it down and it makes a mallet. That is one of my favorite things to use. Those were not very widely used in the US until last 15 years or so, as Europe has had like a more direct influence on the way we play again. We see more European players, and they have some great stuff.
Yeah.
This is a similar kind of stick. This is made with discs of leather. So this is just a little bit less ticky sounding than a wood stick. So you can do those discs with all sorts of materials, and people are starting to do that. That's one of my experiments, is trying different kinds of material to see what happens.
Yeah.
And this is a very traditional European style bamboo stick. This one has the skin on. This is like a very prized kind of stick. This is one of mine that I made early on. It's hard to find Tonkin bamboo that doesn't have a joint in it anywhere. This is a 15-inch long stick, and finding 15-inch lengths with 0 knots in them is not so easy. And these happen to be perfectly straight. That never happens.
That's cool.
And the core of this is actually a wine cork, believe it or not. Cork is a very, very popular material in Europe. In the US, we use more like wood and felt and even masking tape for cores. Mm-hmm. In Philly, that's a big thing, the masking tape core. I've gone more towards the wood and felt and cork. And this is one of the first sticks I ever made. This is an American style stick, what we call a cartwheel. You can see the felt doesn't go over the top. It's sort of sewn around in a cartwheel shape. That's what we call that. And this is one of my most used sticks. If you see a red stick back there, I use these all the time. And yeah, so in the olden days, making sticks it was much more of a hardship. You could get the felt, no problem. You have to buy German lamb's wool felt, which is hideously expensive. And then I would go to a garden store and buy a bunch of bamboo stakes that were 6 feet long and try to find some straight ones, then sand the skin off with sandpaper. Oh my God, it took me like 12 hours to make a pair of sticks, if not more. And then people want to buy them, for $40. And like, not for 12 hours of my time.
Yep.
But now that we have all these like online shopping options, you can get a bunch of perfect bamboo from China. And so that really accelerated my stick making, was getting those perfect materials for cheap from China.
That's really cool. I mean, and it's an amazing craft, and particularly lovely because you're able to really hone the sound that you want to get out of the instrument based on all of these various factors that go into the sticks.
Yeah, like even if I make a stick, even if it's not an original design, if like the little qualities of it are just what I want, like the weight, the balance, the amount of vibration, that's invaluable. And these are the things you can't describe to a stick maker. Mm-hmm. Can it be a little more? What's the word? I don't know, but I know the stick. I know the right stick when I use it.
Well, and it's nice as a conductor, and I know that you probably have other conductors who also feel very comfortable asking, can it be a little softer? Can it be a little bit more nuanced sound? And okay, well, you'll try a different stick and see what it sounds like.
Stuart, can I praise you for a moment? You are
anytime.
You're the only conductor who's ever asked me to use a softer stick.
Really?
The only thing conductors usually say is, "Can I have a harder stick?" But you You actually wanted a more tonal, prettier sounding stick. So yeah, you bucked the trend, and I appreciate you so much for that.
My great pleasure. I'm delighted. Delighted to oblige. So to wind this whole thing up, let's talk a little bit about the future. I mean, we're in this downtime now, and I know various orchestras are having a harder time than others. I know that Phoenix is having a very difficult pandemic.
It is. Yes.
What do you see as the future of orchestral music?
Man, this is a confounding question, because even before the pandemic, I was a little worried about the future of classical music. It's just we have to try harder and harder to sort of persuade the public that we're legitimate, I feel. So, man, in hard times like this, when everybody's suffering so much, I think we have to find a way to remind people that actually what we do isn't intimidating. It actually brings joy. It brings healing. And if there's some way, one of my greatest moments as a musician was after 9/11. And a lot of people, took stock of their lives after 9/11, and I did too. And I thought, I feel like I can help by being a musician. And I got the opportunity to do that. Shortly after 9/11, there was a ceremony at Yankee Stadium for the families of the victims. And there was a huge dais filled with pretty much every religious denomination you could think of, and many, many dignitaries, Bill and Hillary Clinton, Rudy Giuliani. I forget who some of the others were, the head of police and chief of fire department. And doing that, I just thought, I'm part of the ceremony that is trying to heal the country. And I think that's what classical music does in a way that no other music can. I mean, I love other kinds of music, and they have these compensating virtues. But when it comes to healing the soul, there's nothing that does for me what a great classical concert does. And I think we could use a lot of soul healing these days.
Here. I agree with you there. Well, thank you so much, Peter. As always, a great pleasure to see you, to talk to you, and thank you for sharing not just your expertise, but your passion for the art form. And look forward to the next time you come back out to Harrisburg to play with us.
I can't wait, Stuart. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Enjoy the Southwest, and I'll see you soon.
Will do.
Okay, take care, Peter.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that wonderful interview and those demonstrations of what the timpani can do. Next month, we'll be featuring our principal harpist, Rebecca Kaufman-Weaver, who will talk about the harp, talk about her journey in music, and why she continues coming to Harrisburg, even though she lives in Vermont. In the meantime, I'd like to wish all of you a very, very happy holiday season. No matter what you're celebrating, I hope it's a joyous time for you and your family. Stay safe, stay healthy, have a wonderful new year, and see you in January.